Welcome to Dr. Harmony, the place where we peel back the polished layers of perfect lives to reveal the raw, often heartbreaking truths hidden underneath. Today's story isn't just about a marriage falling apart. It's about a level of audacity that most of us couldn't even imagine in our darkest nightmares. Imagine building a life with someone for 5 years, raising 2 beautiful children, and believing your foundation is solid, only to have your husband walk through the door with a 3-month-old infant in his arms, demanding you raise his mistress's child as your own. This is a journey through betrayal, the shattering of trust, and the incredible strength it takes to say, enough, when the person you love most asks you to do the impossible. If you believe that respect is the non-negotiable heartbeat of any relationship, stay with us until the end. Let's dive into today's chilling account of a family deceived. 5 years. They say the first few years of marriage are the hardest, but for me, they felt like a dream I never wanted to wake up from. My husband, Minh, was the man I thought I had prayed for. We had 2 children, a 4-year-old daughter who had his eyes and a 2-year-old son who had my smile. Our home was filled with the chaotic, beautiful noise of a young family. I spent my days balancing a part-time remote job and the endless needs of our toddlers, always fueled by the belief that Minh was out there working just as hard for our future. He was a provider, or so I told myself. He was often late, often tired, and increasingly distant over the last year. But I chalked it up to the pressures of his new promotion. I stayed up late to warm his dinner. I kept the kids quiet when he had a headache, and I never once doubted his loyalty. Looking back, my trust wasn't just innocence. It was a blindfold I had tied around my own eyes. The evening it all changed started like any other Tuesday. The rain was drumming against the windows, a rhythmic sound that usually made me feel safe inside our warm living room. I was folding laundry, watching the kids play on the rug, when I heard Minh's key turn in the lock. He didn't come in with his usual weary "I'm home" sigh. Instead, there was a heavy silence. When he finally stepped into the light of the hallway, he wasn't alone. In his arms, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, was a baby. At first, I thought he was helping a neighbor, or that there had been some kind of emergency. I stood up, a smile beginning to form on my face, ready to offer help. "Minh, whose baby is that?" I asked, my voice soft so as not to wake the sleeping infant. He didn't look at me. He looked down at the bundle in his arms with a look of terrifying tenderness, a look he hadn't given our own children in months. He walked past me, placing the baby carrier on our dining table, right next to our family photo. Then he turned around, his face cold, devoid of the guilt I would later realize he should have been drowning in. "This is my son," he said. The words didn't register at first. I felt a strange ringing in my ears, like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. I laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "What are you talking about, Minh? That's not funny." But he didn't laugh back. He stood his ground, his shoulders square. "He's 3 months old. His mother, she can't take care of him anymore. It's better if he grows up here, with his siblings. You're already home with our 2, so adding 1 more won't change much. I expect you to take care of him." The world tilted. The laundry basket I was holding slipped from my hands, spilling tiny socks and shirts across the floor. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind was racing, trying to do the math, trying to find a version of reality where this was a mistake. 3 months old. That meant this child was conceived while I was still healing from the birth of our second son. While I was waking up at 3 a.m. to nurse our baby, Minh was in the arms of another woman, creating a new life. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I couldn't breathe. "You had an affair," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "And you think you can just bring him here? You want me to mother the evidence of your infidelity?" Minh shrugged, a gesture so casual it made my skin crawl. "The details don't matter. What matters is that he is a Minh family child. I am the father, and I've decided he lives here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at the baby. He was beautiful, innocent, and completely unaware that he was a hand grenade thrown into the middle of my life. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was quickly eclipsed by a towering, righteous rage. My husband wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't crying, begging for a second chance, or explaining how this happened. He was giving me an order. He was treating me like a service provider, an employee whose job description had just been expanded to include mistress's nanny. He hadn't even told me who the woman was. He didn't think I deserved to know. In his mind, my feelings were irrelevant compared to his convenience. He wanted the perfect family image while maintaining the fruits of his betrayal. He wanted to have his cake, eat it, and have me wash the plate afterward. "No," I said. It was a small word, but it felt like the first solid thing I had touched in an hour. Minh blinked, clearly surprised. He was so used to my compliance, so used to me smoothing over the wrinkles in our life, that he truly expected me to just nod and reach for a bottle. "What do you mean, no?" he snapped. "I told you. It's my son. You're my wife. This is your responsibility now." I walked over to the table, not to the baby, but to Minh. I looked him dead in the eye, seeing the stranger hiding behind the face of the man I loved. "I am your wife, not your servant, and I am certainly not the dumping ground for your mistakes. Take that baby back to whoever he belongs to, because he is not staying in this house." The mask of the good husband finally slipped, revealing a sneer of entitlement that chilled me to the bone. Minh's face contorted into a mask of cold arrogance I had never seen before. He stepped toward me, trying to use his height to intimidate me, a tactic he had never dared to use in our 5 years of marriage. "You don't understand," he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "This isn't a request. I've already signed the papers. I am his legal guardian, and his mother is out of the picture. Are you really so heartless that you would turn away an innocent child? What happened to the kind, nurturing woman I married?" His words were a calculated strike, designed to make me feel guilty for his own sins. It was gaslighting in its purest form. He was trying to frame my refusal as a character flaw, rather than a logical reaction to his ultimate betrayal. I looked at the baby in the carrier, then back at the man who was supposed to be my protector. "The woman you married didn't sign up for a polygamous household," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And she certainly didn't sign up to be a backup plan for your mistress. If you cared so much about being a father to this child, you should have thought about that before you destroyed our family." The room felt smaller, the air thick with the smell of damp rain and the faint, sweet scent of baby powder that now felt like a poison. My 2 children were still in the corner, hushed and confused, sensing the tectonic plates of their world shifting. I realized then that this wasn't just about a baby. This was about power. Minh had spent years carefully constructing a version of me that was submissive and grateful, and now that his secret was out, he was trying to force me into a corner where I had no choice but to accept his terms. He laughed then, a dry, humorless sound that made my hair stand on end. "Destroyed? I'm providing for everyone. I work 10 hours a day so you can stay here and play house. The least you can do is take care of my blood. He is your children's brother. Do you want them to grow up knowing their mother was the reason their brother was tossed into the system?" The cruelty of his logic was breathtaking. He was weaponizing my own children against me. He knew that my greatest weakness was my love for my kids, and he was trying to use that love to bind me to a life of humiliation. But what he didn't realize was that my love for my children was exactly why I couldn't stay. I refused to let them grow up in a house where betrayal was normalized and where their mother was a hollowed-out shell of a person. I turned away from him and walked into our bedroom, my hands shaking as I grabbed a suitcase from the top of the closet. The sound of the zipper echoed like a gunshot in the quiet house. I heard his heavy footsteps behind me. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "You're making a scene over nothing. Just put the clothes back. We'll talk about this when you've calmed down." I didn't stop. I began throwing handfuls of my clothes and the children's essentials into the bag. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but a strange, icy clarity had taken over. For 5 years, I had been the peacekeeper. I had been the one to apologize, even when I wasn't wrong, just to keep the harmony. But you cannot keep the peace with a man who has declared war on your dignity. "I am calm, Minh," I said, pausing to look at him. "I am the calmest I have ever been. I am seeing you for exactly who you are. You didn't bring that baby here because you love him. You brought him here because the woman you were seeing probably gave you an ultimatum, or she walked out and you realized you couldn't handle the responsibility alone. You don't want a son. You want a free nanny who you happen to be married to." His silence was all the confirmation I needed. The mother out of the picture story was likely a lie, or at best, a half-truth. He had been living a double life for over a year, and now that his two worlds had collided, he expected me to be the glue that held his mess together. I walked back into the living room, gathered my 4-year-old and 2-year-old, and ushered them toward the door. They were quiet, eyes wide with fear, clutching their favorite stuffed animals. Minh stood in the middle of the room, blocking our path to the door. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his eyes narrowing. "This is my house. These are my children." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up. "Move, or I call the police and tell them exactly what's happening. I'll tell them you're trying to prevent me from leaving with my children while you have an unidentified infant in the house. Do you want that kind of attention, Minh? Especially with your big promotion coming up?" He hesitated. For a man like Minh, reputation was everything. He lived for the respect of his colleagues and the envy of his friends. The thought of a public scandal, of the police arriving at our suburban doorstep, was the only thing that could pierce his ego. He slowly stepped aside, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and cowardice. "Fine," he spat. "Go to your mother's. See how long you last without my paycheck. You'll be back in 48 hours, begging me to take you back. And when you do, you'll be taking care of that baby without a single word of complaint." I didn't look back as I pushed the door open and stepped out into the rain. I buckled the kids into their car seats, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and drove away from the life I thought I knew. As I drove through the dark, rainy streets, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a crushing weight of grief. Everything was a lie. Every "I love you," every anniversary dinner, every plan we made for the future was built on a foundation of sand. I thought about the baby back in that house, the innocent victim of a man who viewed people as tools rather than human beings. I felt a flicker of pain for the child, but I knew I couldn't be his savior. I had to save myself and my own children first. My phone began to buzz incessantly in the cup holder. Message after message from Minh. At first they were angry. "You're being hysterical. You're a failure as a wife." Then they shifted. "Think about the kids. Don't ruin everything we built over one mistake." Mistake. He called a year-long affair and a whole other human being a mistake. I arrived at my sister's house, drenched and trembling. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug and ushered the kids inside. It was only then, in the safety of her hallway, that I finally broke. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing for the 5 years I had lost, for the man I thought I knew, and for the sheer terrifying uncertainty of what came next. But even through the tears, one thought remained rock solid. I was never going back. I didn't know how I was going to support 2 children on my own, or how I would explain to them why their father had a new baby, but I knew that any future, no matter how hard, was better than a life built on a lie. Little did I know, Minh wasn't finished with his games. The next morning, a knock came at my sister's door that would change the trajectory of the legal battle I was about to enter. The knock at the door the next morning wasn't the aggressive pounding I expected from Minh. It was a soft, hesitant series of taps. My sister, Sarah, looked at me with a questioning glance before cautiously opening the door. Standing there wasn't Minh, but a woman I didn't recognize. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed and her clothes slightly disheveled. In her hand she held a small diaper bag, the same brand as the one Minh had brought into our house the night before. My heart skipped a beat. "Is Minh here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sarah stepped back, allowing the woman to see me standing in the hallway. The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Two women, connected by the same man's cowardice. "I'm his wife," I said, the word feeling heavy and foreign in my mouth. "And if you're looking for Minh, he's at the house we used to share." The woman, whose name I would soon learn was Lynn, let out a shaky breath and leaned against the doorframe. "He told me you knew," she whispered. "He told me you couldn't have any more children after your second, and that you had agreed to adopt his son because I couldn't afford to keep him." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The level of premeditated deception was staggering. Not only had he betrayed me, but he had crafted an entire narrative of my supposed infertility to manipulate this woman into handing over her child. He hadn't just cheated. He had played a long game of psychological chess with both of our lives. I invited her in, not out of kindness for the woman who had slept with my husband, but out of a desperate need to know the truth. As we sat at Sarah's kitchen table, the story poured out of her. Lynn was a junior designer at a firm Minh's company frequently contracted with. He had targeted her when she was at her most vulnerable, fresh out of college and struggling to find her footing. He told her he was unhappily married, that his wife was cold and distant, and that they only stayed together for the image. When she got pregnant, he didn't run. Instead, he became the hero, promising her that he would take care of the baby and that his wife was actually eager to raise a third child. He had effectively used me as a selling point to keep his mistress from seeking child support or making a scene. "He told me last night that he was taking the baby to our home," Lynn said, tears streaming down her face. "But then he stopped answering my calls. I got scared. I went to the house this morning, but I saw your car wasn't there, and I saw him through the window. He was screaming into his phone, throwing things. He looked like a monster." I listened in silence, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The man she was describing was a stranger to me, yet he was the man I had shared a bed with for half a decade. He had managed to keep these two worlds separate with surgical precision, only for both to collapse the moment he tried to merge them. I realized then that Minh's plan wasn't just about the baby. It was about total control. He wanted to keep his wife, his mistress's child, and his reputation all under one roof. Lynn reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of documents. "He made me sign these," she said. "He told me they were temporary guardianship papers, but when I read them again this morning, they looked like a full waiver of my parental rights." I scanned the documents. Minh had used a lawyer, likely a friend from his golf club, to draft a ruthless agreement that stripped this woman of any claim to her son. He hadn't brought that baby home out of a sense of duty. He had brought him home as a trophy of his own manipulation. He wanted a son without the inconvenience of the mother. My blood ran cold as I realized that if I had agreed to his terms, I would have been an accomplice in this kidnapping by contract. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lynn looked at me with a desperate kind of honesty. "Because I saw the way he looked at you in the photos around your house. He doesn't love me, and he doesn't love you. He only loves himself, and I realized that if he could lie to you for years, he would eventually do the same to our son. I want my baby back, but I'm terrified of what he'll do to me." At that moment, the anger I felt toward her began to transform into something else. A shared sense of victimhood. We were both victims of a predator who wore the mask of a respectable family man. I looked at the papers, then at the clock. It was 10 a.m. Minh would be at work by now, trying to maintain his perfect employee persona. "You're going to get your son back," I said, my voice firm. "But we have to do this legally. If you go to that house alone, he'll call the police on you for trespassing. We need a lawyer, and we need to act before he moves the baby somewhere else." I called a friend from university who specialized in family law. As I explained the situation, I could hear her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "This is more than just a divorce, Han," she said. "This is fraud, potential coercion, and a mess of custody issues. You need to stay where you are. I'm coming over." The gears of justice were finally starting to turn, but I knew Minh wouldn't go down without a fight. He was a man who built his life on appearances, and he would burn everything down before he let that image be tarnished. While we waited for the lawyer, I checked my bank account on my phone. My heart dropped. The joint savings, the money we had set aside for our children's college, the money from my own inheritance, was gone. He had drained the account at dawn. It was a clear message. "If you leave me, I will starve you out." He was trying to force me into a position of total dependence, thinking that the lack of funds would bring me crawling back. But he underestimated the fire he had ignited within me. He had taken my money, my trust, and my home, but he couldn't take my resolve. I looked at my children playing in the next room, unaware of the war their father had declared on their mother. I took a deep breath and looked at Lynn. "We're going to take him down," I promised, "for both of our sakes." The arrival of my lawyer, Lan, changed the atmosphere from one of panicked grieving to one of strategic warfare. She sat at the table, her eyes scanning the documents Lynn had provided, with the precision of a hawk. "This is a mess, but it's a mess we can work with," Lan said, her voice providing a much-needed anchor. She explained that because Minh had drained our joint accounts, we could file for an emergency hearing to freeze his personal assets and demand the immediate return of the funds. But the bigger issue was the baby. Minh had legal guardianship based on papers signed under false pretenses. "Lynn, you need to file a petition to revoke that waiver immediately, claiming duress and fraud. Han, you are filing for divorce on the grounds of adultery and extreme mental cruelty." Just as we were outlining our first move, my phone rang. It was Minh. I didn't want to answer, but Lan nodded, signaling me to put it on speaker and record the conversation. I took a shaky breath and hit the button. "Where are you?" Minh's voice was disturbingly calm, the kind of calm that precedes a storm. "I've had a very long morning, Han. The baby is crying, and I have a conference call in 20 minutes. This little tantrum of yours has gone on long enough. Bring the kids home and I might forget you ever left." I felt a surge of nausea. He was talking to me like a disobedient child, completely ignoring the fact that he had stolen our life savings and brought a secret infant into our home. "I'm not coming back, Minh," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I know about the money. I know about the lies you told Lynn. And I know that you've been planning this for months." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, the calm was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened edge. "Lynn, you've been talking to that girl. She's a confused, unstable child, Han. You're really going to take the word of a home wrecker over your own husband? Think about your reputation. Think about what people at the club will say when they find out you're associating with my mistake. If you move forward with this, I will make sure everyone knows you're the one who walked out on your family." "I didn't walk out on my family, Minh. You brought a stranger into it and tried to erase me," I countered. Lan signaled for me to end the call. I hung up before he could respond, my heart racing. It was clear that Minh's primary concern was still his image. He wasn't worried about his son's well-being or my heartbreak. He was worried about the club and his reputation. Lan looked at me grimly. He's going to use the unstable narrative against both of you. He'll portray you as a bitter, vengeful wife and Lynn as a girl who didn't want her child. We need to act fast before he starts spreading his version of the story to your friends and family. By the afternoon, the war had moved to social media. I started receiving notifications from mutual friends. Minh had posted a photo of himself holding the baby, a carefully filtered black and white image that screamed, "Doting single father." The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Life throws us curveballs, but family is everything. Stepping up to do the right thing for my son, even when others choose to walk away. It's a difficult road ahead, but I'll do whatever it takes to protect my children." The comments were already pouring in. "So brave, Minh. We had no idea. Where is Han? Why isn't she helping?" My stomach turned. He was setting the stage to play the martyr, casting me as the heartless woman who abandoned a baby in need. Lynn was devastated. Seeing him use her son as a prop for internet sympathy was more than she could bear. "He's using him," she sobbed. "He doesn't even know how to change a diaper, Han. He's just using that baby to make himself look like a hero." I realized then that Minh's narcissism was his greatest weapon, but it would also be his downfall. He was so focused on the audience that he was making mistakes in the real world. Lan spent the rest of the evening preparing the filings. We were going to hit him with everything at once. A restraining order to protect the kids, a motion for temporary support, and a challenge to the custody of the infant based on his fraudulent claims to Lynn. As night fell, a sense of exhaustion settled over the house. My children were finally asleep, tucked into Sarah's guest bed. I sat on the porch looking out at the dark street, wondering how my life had unraveled so completely in less than 24 hours. I thought about the 5 years of memories, the birthdays, the holidays, the quiet moments, and realized they were all tainted. Every smile he gave me was a mask. Every "I love you" was a tactic to keep me in my place. The man I had loved didn't exist. He was a character created by a con artist to gain the stability of a home while he pursued his whim elsewhere. But as I sat there, I felt a flicker of something new, a cold, hard sense of purpose. For years I had been the harmonizer, the one who made sure everyone else was happy, often at the expense of my own needs. I had allowed myself to be small so he could feel big, no more. If Minh wanted a fight, I would give him one. But it wouldn't be the hysterical, emotional outburst he expected. It would be a calculated, legal dismantling of the world he had built. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my children to grow up, knowing that their mother had a spine of steel. Tomorrow, the first court papers would be served, and the perfect life of Minh would begin to crack in front of the entire world. The following morning, the atmosphere in my sister's house was thick with the scent of coffee and the heavy silence of an impending storm. Lan, my lawyer, arrived early with a stack of signed affidavits and court orders. "The process servers are on their way to Minh's office as we speak," she said, her voice providing a sense of tactical clarity. "We're not just serving him divorce papers. We're serving him a temporary restraining order that prohibits him from moving any more assets and requires him to appear in court within 48 hours regarding the custody of the infant." I felt a brief moment of triumph, imagining the look on Minh's face when those papers were handed to him in front of his colleagues, the very people whose respect he valued more than his own soul. However, Minh was not a man who accepted defeat quietly. By noon, the counterattack began. My phone didn't ring, but my inbox began to fill with emails from his legal counsel. They weren't just contesting the divorce. They were attacking my fitness as a mother. They claimed that my abrupt departure with our 2 children was evidence of an unstable mental state. They suggested that I was suffering from a breakdown due to the stress of a third child entering the home. It was a classic Darvo tactic. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. He was trying to frame my escape from his abuse as an act of child endangerment. Every time I read a sentence, I felt a fresh wave of heat rise in my chest. He was willing to label me insane just to protect his own narrative. Lynn, meanwhile, was experiencing a different kind of pressure. Her phone was being bombarded with messages from Minh's mother, my mother-in-law. For years, that woman had treated me with a lukewarm politeness, but now she was showing her true colors. She was calling Lynn a gold digger and a seducer, accusing her of trying to ruin a stable family. "They're trying to isolate us," Lynn said, her voice small as she sat on the sofa. "He told his mother that I'm trying to extort him for money, using the baby as a pawn." I sat down next to her, taking her hand. "That's what men like Minh do," I said. "They turn everyone against each other, so no one looks at the person actually holding the match. We have to stay together. If we break, he wins." Around 3 p.m., a black SUV pulled up in front of Sarah's house. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't Minh, but his private investigator, a man he had clearly hired to track us down. The man didn't get out of the car. He just sat there, a camera visible through the tinted window. It was a blatant intimidation tactic, a way of telling me that even though I had left his house, I was still under his thumb. Lan immediately called the local precinct to report the harassment. "He's testing your boundaries, Han," she warned. "He wants you to feel unsafe. He wants you to think that his reach is infinite, so you'll give up and accept a settlement that favors him." But the intimidation only solidified my resolve. I spent the afternoon going through our old tax returns and bank statements that I had managed to download before he blocked my access. I found things I had never noticed before. Frequent business trips that coincided with Lynn's pregnancy, and large cash withdrawals that had been funneled into a separate account I didn't recognize. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that our entire happy life was a carefully managed facade. He had been preparing for a double life for a long time. The baby wasn't an accident. It was a consequence of a man who believed he was above the rules of society and morality. He truly thought he could have a wife at home and a family on the side, and that both would simply fall in line. The most heartbreaking part of the day was explaining to my 4-year-old why we couldn't go home. She kept asking where Daddy was and why he had a new baby. How do you explain to a child that their father is a stranger? I held her close, promising her that we were going on an adventure and that she was safe. But inside I felt a profound sense of failure. I had chosen this man. I had brought these children into a world where their father viewed them as extensions of his ego, rather than human beings to be cherished. I vowed right then that I would spend the rest of my life freeing it up to them. I would build a home where the truth was the foundation, not a weapon. As evening approached, we received a message from a former colleague of Minh's. The man had been fired by Minh 6 months ago after questioning some irregularities in the firm's billing. He had seen Minh's doting father post and reached out to Lan. "I have something you might want to see," he wrote. He provided us with a link to a private cloud folder. Inside were emails and photos that Minh had accidentally left on his work computer. Evidence of not just one affair, but several. It turned out Lynn wasn't the first, and she likely wasn't the last. Minh had a pattern of targeting younger, vulnerable women in the industry, using his position of power to lure them into his orbit. The realization hit me like a physical weight. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating husband. I was dealing with a serial predator. The baby he had brought home was the only mistake that had resulted in a child he couldn't hide, which is why he had tried to force me into raising it. If I took the child, the problem went away. If I raised the baby, he remained the perfect family man with a secret. The sheer depravity of his plan made me shudder. I looked at Lynn, who was nursing a cup of tea, looking younger and more broken than ever. She had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. I decided then that I wouldn't just divorce him. I would expose him. I would ensure that no other woman would ever fall for his perfect husband trap again. The evidence provided by Minh's former colleague was the smoking gun we needed. As I scrolled through the folders, I saw a side of my husband that made my skin crawl. There were hotel receipts, intimate messages to 3 different women, and even a series of derogatory emails, where he laughed about how easy it was to keep me satisfied with a few designer handbags and a nice dinner once a week. He referred to me as his domestic manager, a role he felt I was lucky to have. The man I had loved, the man I had built a home with, didn't just betray me, he held me in absolute contempt. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. The grief was gone, replaced by a surgical focus. I wasn't just going to leave him, I was going to dismantle the pedestal he had built for himself. "We have enough for a character assassination in court," Lynn said, her eyes gleaming with professional intensity. "But more importantly, these financial irregularities suggest he's been embezzling from his own company to fund these affairs. If we can prove he was using corporate funds for personal entertainment, his career is over. He won't just lose the house, he'll lose his license." I looked at the screen, at a photo of Minh laughing at a rooftop bar with a woman who looked barely 21. It was dated the same week my son had been hospitalized with a high fever. I had been at the hospital alone for 3 days while Minh claimed he was at a mandatory leadership retreat. The rage was a physical heat in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "Do it," I said. "Use everything." The next morning was the emergency hearing for the temporary restraining order and custody of the infant. I arrived at the courthouse with Lynn by my side. She looked terrified, her hands shaking as she clutched a folder of her own evidence. Minh was already there, standing in the hallway with his high-priced legal team. He looked impeccable in a navy blue suit, his hair perfectly styled, the image of a wronged but dignified father. When he saw me, he didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. He stepped away from his lawyers and approached us, his voice a low, condescending whisper. "Han, stop this nonsense now. You're making a fool of yourself. Think about the kids. Do you really want them to grow up with a mother who is known as a spiteful, bitter ex-wife?" I didn't flinch. For the first time in 5 years, his words had no power over me. "The only person making a fool of themselves is you, Minh," I replied, my voice carrying just enough for his lawyers to hear. "I know about the corporate accounts. I know about the other women, and I know exactly how much you've stolen from our family to pay for your retreats. This isn't about bitterness. This is about an audit." I saw the color drain from his face for a split second before his mask of arrogance snapped back into place. He turned on his heel without a word and walked into the courtroom. He still thought he could charm his way out of this. He still thought the judge would see a successful provider and a hysterical wife. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was sterile and tense. Minh's lawyer opened with a dramatic plea, painting Minh as a heroic father who was simply trying to do right by an innocent child, while his wife suffered a hormonal and emotional collapse. He showed the judge the black and white photo Minh had posted online, the one that had garnered so much social media sympathy. "My client only wants stability for all 3 of his children," the lawyer argued. "It is the mother who has uprooted the family and fled in the middle of the night." I felt a sting of tears, but I blinked them back. I looked at the judge, a woman with graying hair and eyes that had clearly seen every trick in the book. Then it was Lynn's turn. She didn't lead with the affair. She led with the fraud. She presented the bank statements showing the drain joint accounts, followed by the guardianship papers Minh had forced Lynn to sign under false pretenses. "Your Honor," Lynn said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "this is not a case of a loving father stepping up. This is a case of a man who used deception to kidnap a child from his mother and attempted to coerce his wife into providing free labor to cover his tracks. We have evidence of systemic financial abuse and a pattern of predatory behavior that extends far beyond this one mistake. She handed over the flash drive containing the emails and the corporate irregularities. The shift in the room was palpable. The judge's expression went from neutral to grim as she reviewed the documents. Minh sat perfectly still, but I could see the vein in his temple throbbing. When the judge looked up, she didn't look at Minh with sympathy. She looked at him with a profound sense of distaste. "Mr. Minh," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "these allegations are extremely serious. Until a full investigation into the validity of the guardianship papers is completed, and until your financial records are audited, I am granting a temporary order of protection. The infant will be returned to his mother, Lynn, immediately under court supervision, and you are ordered to vacate the marital home by 6 p.m. today." Minh's lawyer jumped up to protest, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of her hand. "I am not finished. Mr. Minh is also ordered to return the funds removed from the joint savings account within 24 hours, or he will be held in contempt. Furthermore, Han is granted temporary full custody of their 2 children, with supervised visitation for the father only." I felt a sob of relief escape my throat. Beside me, Lynn began to cry, quiet, heavy tears of joy. She was getting her son back. The man who thought he could play God with our lives had just been stripped of his power in a matter of minutes. But as we walked out of the courtroom, Minh caught my eye. The look he gave me wasn't one of defeat. It was a look of pure, unadulterated venom. I knew then that the legal victory was only the beginning of his desperation. The victory in the courtroom felt like the first breath of fresh air after drowning for years. Watching Lynn walk out of the building clutching her son, who had been brought to the court by Minh's mother under police supervision, was a moment of pure justice. The infant was back in the arms of the woman who actually loved him, and the chains Minh had tried to wrap around all of us were finally beginning to rust. But as I watched Minh's mother glare at me with a look of pure hatred before she scurried away, I knew the image Minh had spent a lifetime building was now a pile of rubble. And a man who lives for his image is at his most dangerous when that image is shattered. By that evening, I was back in my house. It felt strange to be there without him. The air was still thick with the scent of his cologne and the lingering tension of our final confrontation. Following the judge's order, Minh had been forced to pack a single suitcase and leave. He had left the house in a state of disarray, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, and a bottle of expensive whiskey smashed in the kitchen sink. It was a petty, silent tantrum. I spent the night changing the locks and installing a security system. Every click of a bolt felt like a stitch in the wound of my broken trust. I was reclaiming my space, one room at a time, but the silence of the house was haunted by the ghost of the man I thought he was. The next morning, the social media tide began to turn. The heroic father narrative May had carefully cultivated started to leak. Someone, likely the former colleague or another disgruntled associate, had leaked the court's decision to a local community group. The comments on his doting father post turned from "you're so brave" to "where did the baby go?" and "is it true about the embezzlement?" I watched in real time as his digital monument to himself was torn down by the very public he had tried to manipulate. It was a reminder that while lies can travel halfway around the world, the truth eventually catches up, and it usually brings a sledgehammer. However, Minh wasn't going to disappear quietly. Around noon, I received a call from my daughter's preschool. My heart plummeted into my stomach. "Han, I just wanted to let you know that Minh showed up about 20 minutes ago," the director said, her voice laced with concern. "He said he was there to pick up the kids for a surprise lunch." I told him that according to the paperwork you sent this morning, he wasn't authorized for unsupervised pickup. He got very aggressive, Han. We had to threaten to call the police before he finally left. I was shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. He was testing the boundaries, trying to see if he could still exert control over the things I valued most. I immediately called Lan. "He's spiraling," she said, her voice grim. "This is typical behavior for a narcissist who has lost his supply of admiration. He's no longer trying to look good. He's trying to make you hurt. I'm filing an emergency motion to move the supervised visits to a professional facility. Do not leave the house alone, and make sure the security system is armed at all times." I gathered my children and brought them home, keeping them in the backyard away from the street. Every car that drove by made me jump. Every notification on my phone felt like a threat. The man who had once been my partner was now a predator, stalking the perimeter of my life. That evening, a knock came at the door. It wasn't the police or a process server. It was Minh's mother. When I opened the door, keeping the security chain on, she didn't look like the elegant woman I had known for years. She looked haggard and desperate. "Han, please," she whispered, her eyes darting around. "Let him come home. He's lost his job. The firm put him on administrative leave this afternoon because of the audit. He has nowhere to go. You're destroying his life over a small lapse in judgment." I looked at her, stunned by the audacity of her plea. "A small lapse in judgment," I repeated. "He had a child with another woman and tried to trick me into raising it. He stole my inheritance. He lied to everyone we know. And you call that a lapse?" She reached through the gap in the door, trying to grab my arm. "He's a man, Han. Men have needs. It didn't mean anything. But you are his wife. Your job is to protect him, not to feed him to the wolves. Think about what this will do to the children's future if their father is a disgraced criminal." It was in that moment that I realized where Minh's entitlement came from. He had been raised by a woman who believed that his gender excused his cruelty, and that my role was to be his shield. "His future is a result of his own actions," I said, my voice cold and final. "I am protecting my children from a man who thinks they are pawns, and I am protecting myself from a family that thinks my dignity is a fair price to pay for your son's comfort. Don't come here again." I shut the door and leaned against it, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Minh was losing his career, his money, and his reputation, and he was blaming me for every bit of it. I knew the venom I had seen in his eyes at the courthouse was only the beginning. He was a man who had never been told no, and now that the world was screaming it at him, he was looking for someone to punish. I went to the window and looked out at the street. A dark SUV was parked 2 houses down, the engine idling. I didn't know if it was his investigator or Minh himself, but I knew that the drama was far from over. He was a cornered animal, and I had to be ready for the moment he decided to lash out with everything he had left. The following 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological terrorism. Minh didn't call, and he didn't show up at the door again, but his presence was everywhere. It started with the deliveries. Dozens of boxes began arriving at the house, all COD, collect on delivery. They were filled with items I would never buy. Expensive men's watches, baby furniture for a nursery that no longer existed, and even a wedding dress. It was a calculated move to drain what little liquid cash I had left and to clutter my sanctuary with reminders of his betrayal. Then came the welfare checks. Anonymous callers had contacted Child Protective Services, claiming that there were drugs in the house and that my children were being neglected. I had to stand in my living room, humiliated and trembling, while a social worker inspected my pantry and looked into my children's eyes for signs of trauma. The social worker, a seasoned woman named Maria, saw through the ruse almost immediately. "This happens more than you'd think in high-conflict divorces," she said, her voice a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. "Your house is clean. Your children are healthy and bonded to you. This report was a weapon, Han. I'll be filing a note that suggests the reporter is using the system for harassment. Even though I was cleared, the violation felt permanent. Minh was reaching through the walls of my home, using the very institutions meant to protect children to terrorize me. He wanted me to feel that no matter where I went or what legal orders I had, he could still touch me. He wanted me to live in a state of constant vibrating anxiety. By Thursday, the pressure moved from the personal to the professional. I received an email from my manager at the software company where I worked part-time. Han, we've received some very disturbing emails regarding your conduct, it read. Minh had sent screenshots of our private arguments, heavily edited to make me look like I was having a violent psychotic break. He had even reached out to the HR department, claiming that I was using company time and equipment to conduct illegal surveillance on him. While my manager was supportive, the mere fact that my work life was being tainted by his toxicity was a new level of low. He wasn't just trying to take my children. He was trying to take my livelihood. He wanted to make sure that if I left him, I would have nothing left to stand on. I spent that evening in the dark, sitting on the floor of the nursery I had lovingly decorated for our second son. I felt a deep, hollow exhaustion. It would have been so easy to give in. For a split second, I understood why so many women go back to their abusers. The peace offered by submission started to look like a mercy compared to this relentless assault. But then, I heard my daughter giggle in her sleep from the next room. I thought about Lynn and the baby he had tried to steal. If I gave up, I wasn't just surrendering my own life. I was teaching my children that a bully with a bank account and a silver tongue wins every time. I stood up, wiped my face, and called Lan. He's trying to bankrupt my spirit, I told her. What's our next move? We stop playing defense, Lan replied. He's distracted by his attempt to ruin you. He hasn't realized that the corporate audit we requested has already flagged the entertainment expenses. Han, he didn't just embezzle. He was running a kickback scheme with one of the firm's vendors to fund his lifestyle. The police are going to be involved by Monday. We need to get you and the kids out of that house for the weekend. If he realizes the walls are closing in, he's going to explode. I took her advice. I packed a small bag for the kids and told them we were going to a hotel with a big pool. We checked into a secure building under my sister's name, far from the suburbs and the prying eyes of Minh's investigators. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept, but my dreams were filled with the sound of a baby crying. That 3-month-old infant Minh had held like a bargaining chip. I realized that Minh's greatest crime wasn't the cheating or the stealing. It was his complete inability to see people as anything other than objects. To him, that baby was a tool to keep his mistress in check. I was a tool to keep his household running. His own mother was a tool to maintain his reputation. He was a man made of mirrors, reflecting back whatever people wanted to see while remaining empty inside. And now that those mirrors were shattered, there was nothing left but the sharp, jagged edges of his ego. On Saturday morning, I got a frantic text from Lynn. He's at my apartment. He's banging on the door. He says he has a right to see his son. Han, I'm scared. I immediately called the police in her precinct, giving them the case number from our court hearing. My heart was pounding. He had bypassed me and gone for the easier target. He knew Lynn didn't have the resources or the legal team I had. He was trying to take the baby back, believing that if he had the child, he could still win the Father of the Year narrative in court. I stayed on the phone with Lynn until the police arrived. I heard the shouting in the background. Minh's voice, high and distorted, screaming that everyone was conspiring against him. When the police finally detained him, they found a set of packed suitcases and a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty in his pocket. He wasn't just trying to see his son. He was planning to kidnap him and disappear. The realization hit me like a cold wave. If I had stayed, if I had agreed to raise that baby, He might have eventually done the same to our children if things didn't go his way. He was a man who would rather destroy his family and flee the country than face a single moment of accountability. The drama was no longer a divorce. It was a criminal investigation. As the sun set on that Saturday, I realized that the man I had married was officially gone, replaced by a fugitive who had lost everything in his quest to have it all. The news of Minh's attempted flight and the discovery of the one-way tickets changed everything. He wasn't just a cheating husband anymore. He was a flight risk and a potential kidnapper. The police held him in custody over the weekend, and for the first time in years I felt a strange, heavy sense of silence. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence that follows a massive explosion. The man who had occupied every corner of my mind, every worry of my heart, was finally behind bars, even if only temporarily. I sat in the hotel room watching my children play with a set of plastic blocks and realized that the perfect life I had been mourning was actually a prison I had finally escaped. On Monday morning, the corporate audit results were released. Lan called me, her voice buzzing with a mix of professional triumph and genuine shock. "It's worse than we thought, Han. He wasn't just taking kickbacks. He had set up a shell company in his mother's name to funnel project funds into a private account. He's looking at multiple counts of grand larceny and wire fraud. The firm is filing a formal criminal complaint today." I leaned against the cool glass of the hotel window, looking out at the city. His mother's name. He had even used the woman who worshipped him as a shield for his crimes. He had entangled everyone he supposedly loved in his web of greed, never once considering the consequences for them when it all fell apart. The Dr. Harmony within me, the voice of reason I had ignored for so long, finally spoke up. It told me that I wasn't responsible for his downfall. For years I had carried the burden of his moods, his stress, and his secrets, thinking that if I was just a little bit more supportive, a little bit more perfect, he would be happy. But Minh was a bottomless pit of need. No amount of love or loyalty could ever fill a man who didn't have a soul of his own. I realized that my refusal to take in that 3-month-old baby wasn't an act of cruelty. It was the first act of self-preservation I had ever performed. By saying no to that one impossible demand, I had accidentally pulled the thread that unraveled his entire tapestry of lies. By Tuesday, the story had hit the local news. The headline read, "Prominent executive arrested in kidnapping attempt and corporate fraud case." The black and white photo he had posted, the one where he looked like a doting father, was now being used by news outlets to identify him as a criminal. The irony was poetic. The very image he had created to manipulate the public was now the face of his disgrace. My phone was flooded with messages from friends who had previously judged me for leaving. Suddenly, everyone was on my side. "I always knew something was off about him," one message read. "We're here for you, Han," said another. I deleted them all. I didn't need their validation now, just as I hadn't needed their judgment then. Lynn and I met one last time before the final bail hearing. She looked different, stronger, more grounded. Having her son back had given her a sense of purpose that surpassed her fear of Minh. "He tried to tell the police that I gave him the baby voluntarily," she told me, her voice steady. "But I showed them the texts where he threatened to report me to immigration if I didn't sign those papers. He's not going to get away with it, Han." We sat in silence for a moment. Two women who had been pitted against each other by a man who saw us as replaceable parts. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for my part in this." I looked at her and realized I didn't feel any more anger. "We both fell for a master of disguise," I said. "Let's just make sure he never gets near another woman again." The bail hearing was a grim affair. Minh appeared in a jumpsuit, his hair unkempt, the polished executive look completely gone. He looked smaller, older, and desperate. When the judge denied bail, citing the one-way tickets and the severity of the fraud charges, Minh finally snapped. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at me. "You did this!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the courtroom as the guards began to lead him away. "You destroyed this family! You were supposed to be my wife! You were supposed to help me!" It was the final confirmation of his narcissism. Even at the absolute bottom, he couldn't see his own hand in his destruction. To him, the crime wasn't the betrayal or the theft. The crime was my refusal to cover for him. As he was let out, I felt a final chord snap inside me. The 5 years of marriage, the 2 children we shared, the house, the memories, they all felt like a movie I had watched a long time ago. He was no longer my husband, and he was no longer the father of my children in any way that mattered. He was just a man who had made a series of terrible choices and was finally being forced to pay the bill. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. I had a lot of work ahead of me, rebuilding our finances, helping my children through the trauma, and finalizing the divorce. But for the first time in a long time, the path ahead was clear. I drove back to my sister's house to pick up my kids. They were playing in the garden, chasing butterflies in the grass. They looked so happy, so untainted by the darkness their father had tried to drag them into. I realized then that my harmonious life was just beginning. It wouldn't be the fake harmony of a quiet house and a smiling husband. It would be the real harmony of a mother who stood up for herself and her children. I sat down on the grass and let them crawl into my lap, their laughter the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The storm had passed, and while the landscape was different, the foundation was finally mine. The finalization of the divorce took another 6 months, a period of time that felt like both an eternity and a blink of an eye. With Minh behind bars awaiting trial for corporate fraud and attempted kidnapping, the legal proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. He had no leverage left. The house was sold. The stolen funds were partially recovered through the liquidation of his hidden assets, and I was granted sole legal and physical custody of our children. But the real victory wasn't the paperwork or the money. It was the quiet that returned to my soul. The constant low-level hum of anxiety that had defined my marriage was gone, replaced by a sense of autonomy I hadn't felt since I was a young woman. Lynn moved to a different city to start over, but we stayed in touch. She sent me a photo of her son on his first birthday. A happy, healthy toddler who would grow up knowing exactly who his mother was and how hard she fought for him. We are bonded by a trauma that could have destroyed us both, but instead it served as the fire that forged our independence. I often think about that night he walked in with the baby. I think about how close I came to saying okay, just to keep the peace. I realize now that keeping the peace is often just a polite way of saying accepting your own destruction. Real peace is loud, it is firm, and it is built on the courage to say no to people who treat your heart like a doormat. My children are doing well. We talk about their father in age-appropriate ways, and while there are questions and moments of sadness, they are growing up in a home where the truth is valued above appearances. I've returned to work full-time, and though the road to financial recovery is long, every cent I earn is mine. I no longer look for designer handbags or fancy dinners to validate my worth. I find my worth in the strength of my boundaries and the smiles of my children. Minh's name rarely comes up anymore. He is a cautionary tale, a ghost of a life that was never truly real. I am no longer the domestic manager of a lie. I am the architect of my own truth. The journey from betrayal to liberation is never easy. It requires you to look into the eyes of the person you love most and accept that they are a stranger. It requires you to burn down the life you knew to save the life you deserve. But as I sit on my new porch watching the sunset, I know I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. I chose myself, I chose my children, and in doing so, I chose a future that is finally, authentically harmonious. The scars remain, but they are no longer painful. They are simply maps of where I've been and reminders of the strength it took to arrive at where I am today. Thank you so much for joining us for this intense journey of betrayal and ultimate triumph. If this story resonated with you, or if you believe in the power of standing up for your own dignity, please consider subscribing to the Dr. Harmony channel. Your support helps us share more stories of resilience and truth. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and remember that you are the author of your own story. See you in the next video.